Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the New Age magazine, predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. On this podcast, we take a deep dive into the articles of the history, people, and lessons of Freemasonry, as written in the New Age magazine, and their pertinence to both everyday personal and Masonic life. Hosted by brothers Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree, and Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH. Articles from the New Age magazine read by Matt Bowers and brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World.
Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast all about the New Age magazine, the predecessor to our Scottish Rite Journal. I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, along with brother Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH. And we can say this now, Chris, brother Matt Bowers, 32nd degree, as he has now become a master of the royal secret. So congrats, brother Matt.
Congrats, Matt.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
I actually think you mentioned that in a previous
Did I?
podcast, but I'll take the accolades as often as I can, I suppose.
But I was lying then because you were about to be.
I think you were about to be, he mentioned.
No, I think it was just a matter of days before.
Yeah. So, well, at this point, you actually, as we record,
For sure.
are a Scottish Rite 32nd degree master.
Nevertheless, you've got your black hat. Congratulations.
That's true. Well, I recommended to them to just paint the box black that it came in to put on my head because it was.
Yeah, they had to sew two hats together. It was not a.
Exactly.
Yeah, my daughter was there the night he got his black hat, and I was on one side of the room, and for some reason, my daughter was sitting with Matt's wife, and they were all sitting together, and in the middle of it, I texted my daughter and was like, see if Mr. Matt's hat, they had to sew two together. And she's like, I'm not sending him that. I'm like, just show him your phone.
Yeah, she did.
So the point of our podcast here is we have taken issues of the New Age magazine, which was printed in the 20th century as the predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. Brother Chris Ruli, he digitized all of the New Age Journal, so it is available in digital form. And what we're doing is we're taking an article, and then the three of us are discussing it. And this one, Chris, I don't know whether you knew this when you pulled this article for us to talk about or not, but the article is called Finger Rings, A Lost Art by J. Oliver Nugent. This comes from 1904. And one of the most popular videos on our YouTube page by far, I mean, far and away than all the other ones, is the video that I did sort of as a throwaway about Masonic rings and the proper way to wear them. So I don't know if you knew that when you pulled this article or not.
I did. And the only reason I selected this, because if you remember, for those of you who watched from the beginning, we had some interesting topics for the last two. And I really wanted to throw a curveball here and do this. And I remember, Maynard, you mentioned that, the topic of how to wear to the ring, is it top, bottom, how it's, set up is a topic of conversation for Masons. And so I thought, well, let's take a look. And I found this article by Brother Nugent. And this is not your typical, this is more in the side of what the New Age did, especially very early on in its publication run, where they pulled things that are somewhat tangentially associated with Freemasonry. Obviously, the Masonic ring has a very, broad and long production or history in the United States. I'm not really sure how Masonic rings, and maybe there's an expert out there, but how popular Masonic jewelry, rings, all those different other types of jewelry outside of the United States, but it certainly is prominent in the United States. It's a popular thing. It's a way that Masons very much recognize each other if they may not necessarily know they're Masons. And so I like the article. It doesn't dive into the politics or anything of Masonic rings. It really goes back to how did it start, goes to the Greeks, references ancient Egyptian culture, and of course, perhaps we can dive into it as Matt goes through the article. So definitely one of these interesting articles that was part of that original publication run, not necessarily Masonic, but something that the publishers thought, let's add some value to this publication by diving into some interesting history.
I do love that about some of those old New Age journals. And I love that Scottish Rite Journal still carries on that tradition a lot
Absolutely.
today. I mean,
Yeah.
just in a recent issue, it talked about soft drinks and how many
Yeah.
Masons were tied into the soft drink industry. So
Right.
it was kind of a neat thing. So without further ado, Brother Matt Bowers is going to deftly narrate the article for us.
Finger rings, a lost art. The finger ring of this modern time has lost all characteristic meaning in its general form and details. The poetic sentiment, delicate allusion, and playful conceit conveyed by the graceful forms of interwoven flowers and other objects have disappeared. The poetic meaning once attached to gems is a forgotten branch of elegant symbolry, and the meaning of the conjunction of various metals in the device is a lost art. So completely is the art of ring jewelry forgotten that it is now sought to give a poetic sentiment to the very defects which mark the gradation of the art. Even in the unwrought and unmeaning wedding ring of our day, a beauty is sought in its absolute want of any characteristic features whatever, by calling it, with sentimental unction, the plain gold ring. Before I attempt to show you how a wedding ring might be made, or how it has been made, let us look into the origin of finger rings in general. The earliest kinds of rings seem to have been merely portable seals. In Babylonia and Assyria, the first great empires of Central Asia of which we have any record, the act of sealing was most important, as it conferred authenticity upon any important document. This stood in the place of the present practice of attaching the names of the principal parties concerned. Royal edicts were promulgated entirely through the medium of a seal, the decrees of the Assyrian kings being engraved upon a cylinder, a kind of rolling seal of cornelian or metal, from which they were impressed upon the requisite number of pieces of prepared clay. Thus, in Assyria and Babylonia, the seal was really a printing press, which multiplied the royal edicts to any required extent, while small seals were worn on the royal finger, attached to a ring of metal. Such portable signets were used to give authority to deeds of minor importance. The Greeks, at the time of Homer, did not use rings or seals, but shortly afterwards the custom appears to have reached them from the East. In the time of Solon, seal rings, opaeus, appear to have become usual, and with their use came the art of counterfeiting them. This was the case with coined money also, as proved by the discovery of ancient counterfeits of some of the earliest coins known, especially the famed tortoises of Aegina, so called because of the highly wrought image of a tortoise which was the device of the double drachmas of that state. To such great extent did counterfeiting of small rings prevail in Athens that stringent precautions were taken and a law passed by Solon prohibiting any engraver from keeping the form of the seal which he had sold. These early seal rings of the Greeks were probably entirely of metal, the custom of mounting engraved gems not being in general use at that period. Superstition, which in early stages of civilization attaches itself to all things, had now become attached to seal rings. The ring of Gyges, king of Lydia, which is said to have been found in a grave, was believed to convey its own extraordinary powers, as that of Chariclea, mentioned by Heliodorus, and also the famous iron ring of Eucrates. Magic rings become closely interwoven in the later times of Grecian independence. Made of wood, bone, or some other cheap material, they were manufactured in large quantities at Athens and could be purchased, endowed with any kind of charm desired, for the trifling consideration of a drachma. The simple metal seal ring was superseded by one composed of gems, richly mounted in chasings of gold, and as luxury increased, several were worn at once till at last the fingers of both hands were nearly covered with these ornaments. This was at a comparatively early period, as we find the custom alluded to both by Plato and Aristophanes. Eventually custom took the turn of approving rings of enormous size. Some exquisites went so far, at a later period, as we learn from Quintilian, of having a series of such rings suited to the successive seasons of the year. Thus there were summer rings, winter rings, etc. Many of them were of highly ingenious device and finished workmanship. Imagine devices consisting of such features as gracefully wrought representations of divinities supposed to preside over different seasons. Spring, for instance, was suggested by the head of a swallow, in allusion to the sun's entrance into that constellation at the period when the swallow, the harbinger of spring in Greece, first made his annual appearance. For the autumn, Ceres or Bacchus was used, with jewel work of wheat or of grapes and other fruits. Often for the same season, they used the zodiacal sign of the scales, to symbolize the equality of the day and nights at the equinox, the figure being richly wrought in gold. When the sign of the fishes was used, often rare gems were introduced cunningly to represent the scales of the fish. There were no legal restrictions in Greece against wearing gold rings, though the Spartans always affected simple iron ones and their women scarcely pretended this form of luxury at all, wearing only simple amulets of ivory or amber. In romantic legends, both ancient and modern, the ring is made the means of transferring power or authority. "Show this ring to the captain of the guard," etc., is the sort of phrase often found in ancient and medieval legends, the idea being that with the signet the power of the owner might be delegated to any person on whom he chose for a time to bestow it. In Rome, the custom of wearing rings was said to have been introduced through the Samnites, described by Livy as wearing gold rings enriched in jewels. Some, however, state that the Romans adopted the custom in imitation of the Etrurians during the reign of Tarquinius Priscus. The earliest Roman rings, however, were of iron, bearing a stamp or device intended to be used as a seal. To the end of the Republic, the ancient iron ring was still worn by those who affected to condemn modern luxury and innovation. Marius, as Pliny tells us, wore an iron ring in his triumph after the subjugation of Jugurtha. Eventually, however, not only patricians wore gold signet rings, but other classes soon imitated their superiors. However, legal restrictions were soon promulgated concerning the right to wear a gold signet. These regulations were afterwards known as Jus Annuli Auri. The emperors assumed the power of granting the right of the annulus auri, or privilege to wear a gold ring, and this license was much coveted, as it was a sort of patent of nobility. The letter of the law requiring that the father and grandfathers of the licentiates should have possessed a property of 400,000 sesterces. The devices on Roman signet rings were generally subjects connected with the worship of the gods, or portraits of friends and ancestors. In many instances, persons had engraved upon their seal rings symbolical allusions to their supposed origin and history of their families. Augustus first sealed with a sphinx, then with a portrait of Alexander the Great, and lastly with his own portrait. This last custom became very usual. A portrait on the exterior of a letter at once making known its author, just as the carte de visite of a modern Parisian exquisite reveals the photographed perfections of his person and identifies him at once without the necessity of the name. Many of the Roman rings were wrought with the greatest skill in the designs of the mounting and the minute details of the device. Of such there remain numberless exquisite examples preserved in the museums of Europe. It was in the Middle Ages, after a period of comparative barbarism in art, however, that the greatest degree of intricacy in the goldsmith's work began to display itself. Rich enamel in curious devices usurped the place of gems for a time, and designs in yellow still further heightened the artistic effects of small jewelry toward the close of the 15th century. Benvenuto Cellini, the celebrated Italian sculptor, jeweler, architect, and painter, brought the devices of the ring, the brooch, and the earring to a degree of elaboration and perfection never before attained in the whole range of classical art. The quaint conceits of the devices, the effects produced, and the sentiments conveyed by the juxtaposition of various gems and the introduction of mottos written on wavy scrolls produced a pleasing intricacy of design full of meaning and often epigrammatic point, such as the jewelers of recent years never dream of. For in this later day, jewelry making has fallen from the glory of art into all the meanness of trade. It may be, however, that people of today will not pay for a careful, original design, its execution demanding such an amount of artistic talent and labor as would leave the value of the gold and gems employed quite of a secondary consideration. Yet a similar feeling prevailed in Cellini's time, as illustrated in a story which he tells of himself. He worked in a shop of one Luciagnolo, a leading goldsmith of the day, but had permission to get outside work to do on his own account. Cellini, while out studying an antique statue, attracted the attention of Donna Porciacigi, a princess of the wealthy papal family of that name. As a first mark of patronage, she engaged him to make a gold jewel for her, richly wrought with other devices, but in the form of a lily. Luciagnolo dissuaded him, assuring him that such minute and delicate work was not profitable. He indicated, at the same time, a large, boldly embossed silver vase that he was making for Pope Clement. It was such a vase as was used at the time as a receptacle for refuse from the plate at dinner. He assured his pupil that such large, plain work paid better. The master and pupil ended by making a wager over the matter, Cellini maintaining that his work would prove the more profitable of the two. In 12 days, Benvenuto had completed his work, a lily of gold, grouped with miniature fruit, masks of comedy and tragedy, and a number of little devices which, when submitted to Donna Porcia, gave her infinite delight. Cellini stimulated her admiration by explaining the devices and their difficulties of execution, and she paid him more than half as much again as the price agreed upon. The payment was made entirely in gold as a token of extreme satisfaction and accompanied, as he tells us, by compliments. Degna di cotta signora. Luciagnolo, on his part, received only the exact payment of his work, and in heavy silver dollars, losing his wager and becoming, as Cellini tells us with evident self-congratulation, the laughing-stock of the whole goldsmith fraternity. Returning again to the modern plain gold ring, it is probable that the most remarkable examples thereof are the rings which are pictured upon this page. The drawings show the general design of the betrothal and marriage rings of Martin Luther. They are not rich and florid in design as many other examples, but, as monuments of the great reformer and his nun-wife, they have an interest of their own, and sufficiently illustrate a characteristic style of jewel-making which appears to have fallen into a state of desuetude that seems beyond the power of all restoration, even by societies of arts or great international exhibitions. The betrothal ring of Luther, which is still preserved with the greatest care as a national relic of great interest, is composed of an intricate device of gold work set with a ruby, the emblem of exalted love. The gold devices represent all the symbols of the Passion. In the center is the crucified Savior, on one side the spear with which the side was pierced, and the rod of reeds of the flagellation. On the other side is a leaf of hyssop. Beneath are the dies with the soldiers who cast lots for the garment without seam, and below are the 3 nails. At the back may be distinguished the inside of the latter and other symbols connected with the last act of atonement. The whole so grouped as to make a large cross, surmounted by the ruby, the most salient feature of the device. On the inside of the ring, the inscriptions are still perfect. They contain the names of the betrothed pair and the date of the wedding day in German, translated to English, June 13th, 1525. This was the ring presented to the wife at the betrothal and worn by her after the marriage. The marriage ring worn by Luther himself, after his marriage, is still more intricate in its structure. It is an ingeniously contrived double ring, every intricacy of its structure having its point and meaning. In the first place, although the double ring can be divided so as to form 2 complete rings, these cannot be separated from each other, as the one passing through the other causes them to remain permanently interlaced, as an emblem of the marriage vow, inseparable, though still forming 2 perfect rings. They illustrate appropriately the motto engraved within them, translated from German to English: "What God doth join, no man shall part." On the hoop is a diamond, the emblem of power, duration, and fidelity, and on the inside of the raised mounting, which, when joined to the other hoop, can be concealed, are the initials of Martin Luther, followed by a D denoting his academic title. On the corresponding surface of the mounting of the gem of the other hoop are the initials of his wife, Catherine von Bora. These, on the closing of the rings, necessarily lie close to those of Luther. The gem in this side of the ring is a ruby, the emblem of exalted love, so that, the ring being close, the names of Catherine and Luther are closely united beneath the emblems of love, power, and fidelity. There can be but little doubt that these curious and interesting rings were designed by the celebrated painter and goldsmith, Lucas Cranach, the close friend of Luther, who possibly wrought them with his own cunning hand. The following history of the Essex ring is interesting. Charles Knight, in his Old England, Volume 2, page 14, says that when, in 1564, Mary Queen of Scots married Darnley, she sent her fair cousin, Elizabeth of England, a diamond ring in the form of a heart, in token of the event and of her own affection. This was the ring presented by Elizabeth to Essex, as being the most precious it was in her power to give him. This ring was afterwards given by James I to Sir Thomas Warner, who had been James' lieutenant of the Tower. This was intended as an exceptional mark of the royal appreciation for the services of Sir Thomas Warner for having established several colonies in the West Indies. It is today a conspicuous feature in the armorial bearing of the Warner family, who placed it upon their shield with the motto, "I hold from the King." The present owner is C.W. Warner. A Wedding Day Wish. What is the wish that I wish you? Joy and freedom from care, life that is bright and fair, and an absence of pain and rue. What is the joy that I wish you? Home, and you as its star, a love no ill can mar, that will last as the heartbeats do. What is the best that I wish you? Health and strength and hope, life of widening scope, and a heart that is brave and true. Frank H. Sweet.
Once again, the article that you just heard from the New Age Journal is titled "Finger Rings, A Lost Art" by J. Oliver Nugent. I'm assuming Brother Nugent was a Scottish Rite Mason, although I don't, his degree is not noted on here, but I would guess he was probably a Scottish Rite Mason. And it's a pretty interesting history of finger rings in and of themselves. Any thoughts on, as a historian, just right off the bat, Brother Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I like, so where Brother Nugent or, J. Oliver Nugent mentions, it really starts early on with Babylonia and Assyria. They were often not necessarily items that were used for decorative purposes, but they were practical purposes. There was a seal, right? And so this was sort of your seal, a family seal. You know, if you're thinking from Masonic context, if you're a Royal Archmason, you know about the Masonic, a Mark Master degree, and where you make your own little seal, and so, or you make your own mark rather. And so this is, again, what were these rings used for? Practical purposes. And then over time, they became more ornamental. They were associated with perhaps certain ceremonies, right? So there's references to weddings, and there was also a reference, I believe, and I think on page 2 or 3 of in Rome, when you're transferring of power. If you've watched any of those, movies or about, when you get a new pope, that they destroy the old pope's ring. They smash the old ring and they get a new one. So there's a lot of symbolic association to rings. There's a lot of history, not necessarily religious, but sometimes political, sometimes related to the family with weddings. So it's a very broad article.
So the ring smashing thing is interesting. I wasn't aware of that. And my knowledge of seal rings came from watching movies like the Ten Commandments or Ben-Hur when I was a kid. But that the Greeks actually, there was a law that the engravers had to sell the engraving of the seal of the ring after they made it for someone, which I found, which seems to be a simple
Makes
solution.
sense.
Seems to be a simple solution for the counterfeiting issues that they had to deal with, because, how do you go about telling which one is counterfeit and which one is the real deal, when it's back then it was all hand done, very minute detail.
Yeah. And it's sort of, now we always see it as very ornamental. It's just for looks. It's for something, for a special occasion. But before, when you had, these old certificates or old deeds or old documents, you needed something, not a signature, but something that could be pressed and, on wax that could, stand the test of time. And anyone could forge a signature, but if you had a unique seal, and just like you said, Matt, if that original die casting is also sold with it, then you could prevent any nefarious deeds.
Well, the other thing I wondered about too is if with the stink that some people make as to which direction the Masonic ring is to be worn, if it mattered which direction the seal went on whatever,
potentially,
on a piece of clay or whatever.
Yeah, potentially. I can certainly see that. And I think one of the nice things about this article, and I wish this was virtual, maybe we can find a way of highlighting some of the pictures that were included in it, that the author highlights not just the standard, gold ring. There are lots of different seals and tokens, and some rings are not even morphed. They're sort of like in a U fashion rather than a circle. Some have snakes on it. There are some that are really ornate with jewels encrusted on it. So he really starts from the beginning and then watches the evolution over time into Europe and, late 20th century, and does his best to try to connect even his own relationship with his own wife or family in it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff here.
Yeah, and the Pope's ring, it's called the Ring of the Fisherman, or I think the Piscatory ring. It descends from the idea that Peter, who was the first Pope, was the fisherman, the fisher of men, and he, so the image is, it's got like the current Pope's name, and then then a guy in a boat. I guess it's supposed to be Peter. And not only does he use that to seal official documents in wax, but he also, when you greet the Pope, you kiss the ring. You're kissing the ring symbolically of St. Peter.
Right.
And so those things still, there are still organizations, especially older organizations, that attribute power to it. I mean, we all just watched a few weeks ago as King Charles ascended to the throne.
That's right.
And there's definitely a seal of the realm that is worn sometimes as a ring that they still use to seal official documents. So it's a lesser known custom, but it's not a gone custom. But think about when you get something notarized, the notary has to use their seal on it. Most lodges, the lodge secretary, I'm a lodge secretary, I have to have a seal. If I send an official document to somewhere over my signature, I press the seal of the lodge on it. So, I guess the practical way to maintain the seal is if you're always wearing it on your finger, somebody can't swipe it and pretend to be you.
Now, Maynard, one of the things I wanted to ask you, actually, Matt, you just went through this process, so I believe you got your 14th degree ring. Mm-hmm. I think I could say, perhaps with the DeMolay included, that the Scottish Rite is one of the few organizations that has the ring or a ring embedded into the fabric of its degree process, its process of maturing from the 4th degree to the 32nd degree. I can't think of off the top of my head in this right now any other degree or organization that confers that, but you've got a 14th degree ring, and Matt, you just started that, or I believe you got your 14th degree ring. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Just got it within the last couple of weeks, at our ring and cap ceremony.
And you had a ring ceremony.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's Susquehanna Lodge specifically. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, Maynard, is that true in terms of, I can't think of any other organization that does that, but that's a really big deal especially with the Scottish Rite. For individuals who may not necessarily know what that is, what is that ring? Why do we get it?
Sure. And I can speak to this. first of all, I can't speak to any non-Masonic organizations or anything outside of the ones that I am a direct member of.
Right.
So I recently became a Easter Star member. I'm a DMLA dad. And DMLA has a ring, but it's not officially part of there's not a degree that goes along with it like there is in the Scottish Rite. I can't think of anything unless I'm missing something, and
I
you
know.
as well as I do in the York Rite, include all the way up to the Templar degrees. So I don't, and as much regalia as there goes along with the Templar degree, you would think that if there one of us would remember, and it's just not in there. So if somebody wants to correct us, podcast@scottishrite.org. But the 14th degree of the Scottish Rite, your ring represents a covenant, and inside it's inscribed in Latin that I cannot pronounce. Basically says, "What virtue has united, death cannot separate." And so basically, it is a reminder of your covenant, not only to the brothers of your lodge of perfection, but with yourself and with God, to be the best version of you can be on an ongoing basis. So it's that promise, and it's a simple gold band with a triangle, and the triangle is used for a very specific purpose. It alludes to it in the Scottish Rite degrees, but the triangle itself is one of the earliest signs of divinity, and it's one of the strongest shapes in nature because, three, as we've discussed in different arenas, the number three is sacred in a lot of societies for a lot of reasons. It is, in Christianity, is the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. In Eastern philosophies, it's the mind, the body, the spirit. It's the smallest unit of a family, a mother, a father, a child. So the number three is important. That triangle becomes important. And then in the center is the Hebrew character for Yud, which is, it looks like a little squiggly line, and it is the first letter of the unpronounceable or ineffable, as we say, name of God. The real pronunciation is lost to time, but we've kind of created this substitute pronunciation,
right.
And that character is the first letter of it. So that's what the 14th degree ring is. And it really is a symbol of your covenant and a reminder of all the promises and the obligations that you took from your first to your 14th degrees, which all deal with improving yourself as a person. And
right.
That's what that ring represents. But there's that one. And then the 33rd degree ring, which I know about. And they're, the statutes as to what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a triple band of gold with the triangle, and usually there's some stones and things with the number 33 on it. But I'm not a 33rd, so I've not received that degree. I can't and won't comment on it, other than to say that, most of the guys that wear the rings, they wear them pretty proudly. And again, I have to believe it's a type of covenant. It
right.
signifies the promise to the organization.
And just as you mentioned that before, I think that was what I was alluding to, where I think it's sort of baked into the Scottish Rite, rules and regulations about how the ring is supposed to be, what's the sort of the structure, how it's supposed to look, when it's supposed to be conferred, and so that's certainly unique. So I can certainly understand why the editors of the New Age magazine wanted to highlight that, because these Scottish Rite Masons would have received a ring, or they would have been eligible to receive a ring. And so the author made sense to talk a little bit about the history, the symbolic history of the ring. I do know, and Maynard, maybe you can correct me, I do know that the ring ceremonies that's not codified in the Scottish Rite rules and regulations. So I'm not sure, is it different valleys are doing different things? If you come to DC, you're going to see it differently. If you go to Baltimore or California, for example, you might see something different.
So that's a great question. And this is a little bit like free parking and Monopoly, where there is kind of a guideline, but everybody does it different at their own house. So, some people put all the money from the luxury tax on the free parking space, and some people put all the jail money there, and whatever that is in your house. The actual rule is you're supposed to do something to recognize a brother receiving his 14th degree ring. About 20 years ago, maybe even more than that, there was a book that was released. And if you are a member of the Scottish Rite and you are in our portal, you can log in to scottishrite.org and under the in the files for member exclusive content, you'll find a PDF of a book in there called Forms and Traditions. And it describes sort of what the Supreme Council envisioned at the time as being an ideal 14th degree ceremony. And what that was is there would be an explanation of the ring. there'd be a reading of a poem called If My Scottish Rite Ring Could Talk, that I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of. I find it a little silly, and then there's, then you're to walk into the room through something. They want you to pass through a barrier, and a lot of valleys have built a large ring for you to pass through, and on a red carpet, and you're to come with your lady or other escort, and then she is given your ring and it is presented to you. And so that's sort of the basics of the ceremony. A lot of valleys do it a little differently. They mix it up. They'll combine it, like in Susquehanna Valley. Our valley's a little small. We do the caps and the rings all at the same time.
Right.
Baltimore has quite a large production with the way they do it. I know a lot of valleys make a big deal of it. And I think it's another way to celebrate a new Scottish Rite Mason and,
Sure.
to really let them know that what they're doing is something special and something important. And specifically, the promises that you made during that Lodge of Perfection journey are important, and you should carry them with you.
Do you wear a Masonic ring when you're out and about?
I don't wear any rings. I for whatever reason, I can barely stand to wear a watch. I just don't like having anything on me. It drives me a little nuts. So I when I go to a formal Scottish Rite thing or a formal Masonic thing, I will occasionally put my rings on. But I think I'm going to get like my knuckles tattooed. I know Bowers has his knuckles tattooed. So I'm thinking I might do that just so I can have it on there. But no, I don't. But do you? You wear your wedding band, but
I do. But I also wear I do when I attend Masonic meetings. And actually when I do go into work in my office, I work remotely for most of my, perhaps this is not an evergreen topic, but I do work remotely. And so when I do go into the office, which is usually once or twice a week, I do try to wear a Masonic ring, not because I want to, market that I'm a Mason to people, but once in a while I'll, be out, we'll grab lunch or I'll go to the post office during a break and I'll see someone or maybe, someone will stop me. I did have a brother actually catch and sort of show me his ring while we were at the post office, which is why I mentioned it before, which was nice. It was just a small little thing. And it's sort of one of these things where it's a subtle enough way to highlight your association with the fraternity without having, now I love the brothers who wear the big hat with the big square and compass on it or the shirts. That's awesome. You do you show how you want to represent the craft. I find that I like a little bit of the subtleness nature to the ring. So I do wear it sometimes in public, but I do have the wedding ring on. That's usually the only piece of jewelry I have on.
Matt, are you wearing your ring currently? Or do you wear yours regularly, or you kind of a formal thing, or what?
Well, actually, my 14th degree ring I haven't worn, I think, since the night of, because it's actually a little small. One Masonic ring that I ordered online, I actually wear where my wedding band would be on my left hand, because for some reason, when I sized it, when I got it, it was too small for my right hand. But it's funny you mentioned the tattoo thing, because I was actually thinking about today getting the 14th degree symbol, the Yod symbol tattooed on my right hand. Because I mean, especially being a drummer, I don't always play with stuff on. I'll take my whatever beads I have on or my watch off or whatever when I play. It's something that gets in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. But there's one question I did have, and maybe this is a silly question, but was there ever a time, maybe during like the anti-Masonic period, that rings were worn by brothers because they were kind of shunned in a way, that they used it as more of a distinction? Was there ever that?
You hear all kinds of stories and tall tales about that, and it's tough to prove or disprove a lot of it.
Right.
It's a little bit like the forget-me-not story out of Germany, how the Masons would tuck a forget. Masons were persecuted in the Holocaust alongside Jews and
gypsies and
Jehovah's Witnesses were all basically, if you were not of the Aryan race, however they deemed it, they wanted you rounded up and sent away. And there's the story that was put out many years ago about the forget-me-not, and it's been widely adopted, but I've been assured by many a Masonic scholar that it's mostly made up, that it's not that. Now, is it possible that someone somewhere did that, put a little forget-me-not in their lapel? Sure. Is it possible
Yeah.
that someone somewhere wore their ring kind of quietly so people would know? Yeah, absolutely it is. But I don't think that was ever like a big, and I think the reason for that is very simple, is that, again, there's this prevalent misconception that Freemasons, I'm using air quotes here, are some big homogenous group that receive
Right.
orders from on high from some mysterious invisible leader. We don't. Every lodge is different. Every Grand
Right.
Lodge is different. I mean, even in England, where they have the United Grand Lodge of England, every lodge has its own little bit of culture and things
That's
like
right.
that. So there would be no real way to make a pronouncement from one place to another. I mean, they don't agree in some cases on what the degree work should be like. And that's
Right.
the foundation of our order, let alone agree on something like a ring. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Right.
Which
Yeah,
seems it's kind of funny that people would make a stink as to which direction to wear it.
Well, it's also, in Virginia. So I'm a Virginia Mason and a DC Mason, and they wear their aprons. Virginia, you wear it under the jacket, and in DC we wear it over the jacket. And there are always conversations about that, and every jurisdiction does it a little different, or there are little nuances. There's no flag ceremony in DC, for example, and for Masons who, when you open up a lodge meeting, they might understand what that means. But again, different things, and different jurisdictions do different things differently, which is nice.
That DC doesn't start with the pledge and all of that.
We have a pledge, but there is a flag ceremony, in Virginia, and
Right.
obviously I'm not trying to,
it's not secret. It's an American flag.
Fair enough. But no, that is not. We just do the salute to the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance. That's it. There is no other. We're not moving the flag around the lodge room.
Really?
Nope.
Yeah, in Maryland, and I know in Virginia, what happens is the flag is at the back of the room. They present it to the center of the room. We all say the Pledge of Allegiance. Then they put it at the front of the room, and that's
not
that.
in DC.
Huh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
No, and if they did, then I have no records of that being written in lodge minutes or anything. Sometimes they say brother so and so presented the flag.
It probably shaves 5 minutes off of opening. I can't.
There are lodges that read the minutes, right? And I think there was a Grand Master in, where was it, Montana, or one of the lodges that said, you don't have to stand there and read your minutes verbatim. You can just pass the minutes out before the meeting, vote on it, and move on. It's this kind of stuff. Like if you go to a lodge in Virginia, they read the minutes at the end of the meeting. They give you a little synopsis. It shaves a couple minutes if you don't do it. But again, we're diving into different topics.
Yeah, right. Rabbit holes. Many rabbit holes.
I can certainly say I would prefer the apron under the jacket, but that's just me. Move on.
Here's one thing I want to make very clear. And in Maryland, only past masters do that, and they don't even do it that often because it looks weird. But here's one thing I want to make very clear, and this has been one of the reasons why I think that YouTube video that we did on the rings has been so popular and has been such a topic of argument, is that no Grand Lodge, none, not one, has made any official ruling as to how a Masonic ring should be worn, whether it should be the points facing out or the points facing in. No Grand Lodge has made any determination on that. And the United Grand Lodge of England has not done so. I am not aware of any Grand Lodge around the world that has made a ruling on that. Specifically, the Scottish Rite in our statutes regarding the 33rd and the 14th degree rings each, it says it can be worn on any finger of either hand. So they've actually gone ahead and said, do whatever you want. It's written into the statutes.
Interesting.
Wear it however the heck you want, be done with it. Having said that, most people wear it on the ring finger of their right hand or on the pinky finger of their right hand, one or the other. I think a lot of guys start out with it on the ring finger of their right hand, and then as they get a little fatter, they put it on the pinky finger, which is probably where my 14th degree ring would end up right about now.
Oh, no.
So no one has made a ruling on that. In the video, my stance on this is, if and when I do wear my ring, I wear it facing in such a way as to say, who needs to know I'm a Mason today? Am I wanting to let the whole world know I'm a Mason, or am I trying to remind myself that I'm a Mason? So am I in line going to be at the MVA today where I'm going to have to go fight about my car, and I'll be there all day? Why might want to face me to remind me that I'm a Mason and I need to behave as such, even when in a situation of of stress.
Was there ever a time before, say, Etsy or Amazon Prime or anything like that, that there were authorized specific jewelers? I mean, I know DeMolay does that, but
and there's the
especially considering, not to interrupt, you talk about the Greeks that they had with counterfeiting of coins and that sort of thing, and how they made the engravers sell their engraving.
The answer to that is probably not. I mean, the Grand Lodges, I'm sure, have had official jewelers, but you cannot dictate the square and compass,
right?
Because they are symbols that are as old as time itself. I mean, going well back into the 1300s, the square and the compasses, I guess I should say, have been used as symbols. And so you could copyright a specific drawing or engraving of it, but just the symbols themselves are like the Christian cross. It would be impossible to regulate that.
So has, not to interrupt, so has there ever been a lodge that's tried to do one specific to their valley or to their Orient?
I mean, probably, but to what end? I mean, nobody's getting rich selling Masonic jewelry.
Sure. Yeah.
Also in the New Age publication, actually, the front of the New Age magazine and the back of the New Age magazine had advertisements, and so Masonic rings were often advertised. And so, but they would be like one. It's sort of like McCoy, right? Like McCoy is a purveyor of aprons and rings and jewels and all that other stuff. So it was very similar there. They purchased in bulk, and they were trying to sell these things, to a mass audience. And I know for sure, because I know it's in DC, I'm sure it's in New York and, major cities in California and Texas, wherever, that there were local jewelers or brothers were Mason jewelers. And so they, as part of their business, the lodge said, let's help out the brother of our lodge by getting these set of jewels from so-and-so brother. But to say that there's like, the royal charter of, the UGLE, for example, has a company that they work with that has been their traditional company that they've purchased items and jewels and things. To say that that's the, DC or Grand Lodges of New York, California, Texas have that, no.
I think Paul Revere made a few bucks selling Masonic jewels.
That's right.
Yeah. He was a silversmith, and
that's right.
I know that Paul Revere, he definitely made jewels for his lodge, the Morning Star. Was it Morning Star Lodge? Is that correct? Maybe that might not be right. Brother Travis Simpkins would know. Shout out to Brother Travis, because he's a member of that lodge, and that lodge still exists, and they still have those original jewels. I think they're in a museum, but those jewels that exist. And I got to believe that, wanting to make a profit, Brother Paul probably made a few sets of different things and finger rings and stuff. So that they've been around for a long time.
That reminds me of this story that it's in the National Archives. There's a letter from a brother from, I want to say either I know he's in Pennsylvania, but I want to say he was in Philadelphia. And he was looking for a job in the federal government, and he reached out to Thomas Jefferson. So there's a correspondence letter from this brother to Jefferson, basically saying, I'm interested in getting a job. I'm a jeweler by reputation and by profession. And he actually mailed Jefferson a Masonic jewel so he can exhibit and see the quality of his work. Now, we're not sure. We assume that it was mailed back to the individual, but there was a little thank you note from Jefferson that said, thank you for, this display of your craft, and we'll talk with you later. But I'm not sure if the brother actually ever got a job in the administration. But that's an example. In other words, that's an example of where Masonic jewels were shared or displayed with non-Masons, especially, interestingly, presidents of the United States, and Thomas Jefferson, no less.
Well, I'll have to share with both of you later some pictures that a brother took from a lodge in New Jersey. It was the mother lodge for, does the name Robert Wadlow ring any bells?
Sure. The world's tallest man ever. Ripley's Believe It or Not. He's in every one of those museums. I always, because the kids like to go to those a lot. And I'll say, he's a Mason.
World's tallest Mason.
Yeah, his ring is at a lodge in New Jersey that a brother that I
a hula hoop.
Yeah. And he places his ring. The brother whose article reading I just did for the Scottish Rite Journal, he has a picture of his ring placed to Robert Wadlow's ring, and it's like Andre the Giant holding a beer can type of thing. It's just ridiculous.
Wow.
Well, the question I have is about this is in terms of Masons, and I guess not just in rings, but in bling, let's say, in general. Why do you think it is that Masons are so big on things like the rings, the lapel pins, the, ornate belt buckles and all those kinds of things? What is it about Masons that they want to show that? Because if we're supposed to be having a secret society, we're not doing a very good job if we're all walking around with big rings and big belt buckles and license tags and all that.
Well, I think oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's just the nature of that person. I joke with my wife sometimes about her jewelry, and I'll say to her, so you got your Mr. T starter kit? You have the Masonic Mr. T starter kits. I think it's just the nature of the person. They're going to wear stuff like that regardless of what their affiliation is.
I would say there's two parts to that question. So the first part is, I think if you're a new Mason, you don't know better. You're being told that you're getting a ring, or I've seen your grandpa wear a ring, or your father was, they were a Mason, they saw them with a ring, and it's sort of this tradition of wearing these interesting artifacts, and showing them off. The other part to that, I would say, is Freemasonry is inherently not a secret society. It's a society in which its initiations are secret. And so if you go back to these old, pre-Revolutionary War Masonic lodges in the United States and, lodges outside the United States, people wanted to display their affiliation with ornate jewelry as a way of having respect and, wanting to show off that they are members of the lodge. A past master's jewel, a beautifully ornate past master's jewel, is gorgeous. It's sort of like it stops you in your tracks when you see a great jewel of great craft work and art on it. And by the way, it's really difficult to make these types of things, right? I mean, I'm sure brothers can go online or Google on eBay. I know, Brother Maynard, you have a video on stuff that people find on eBay. There are jewels that are $5,000, 14 karat gold with little encrusted jewels, rubies or sapphires on there that are just gorgeous. And so, to me, I think it's an expression, a way of expressing your love and interest for the fraternity in a way that you can do so that follows a tradition, that follows a history, whether your parents were involved with the Freemasons, or your grandparents, or your forefathers, or just because you served as a master of your lodge, or as a grandmaster, a past grandmaster, and you want to highlight that when you go out and engage in some type of activity.
I know for me too, because I love skulls, the more ornate stuff I can find with skulls on it, like my ring. I don't know how well you can see that.
There it is.
The more stuff that I can find, I'm happy. That works for me.
Yeah.
But it's also the sentiment of it too.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're not violating your obligations, to me, I feel like go and find a way that expresses how you want to express Freemasonry or your involvement in Freemasonry. You could be a brother that has never sat in an officer's chair or in a lodge chair, or maybe ever served as a committee because you're maybe busy with your personal life. But if you want to buy a ring and say, hey, I'm really proud about being a Freemason. Do I attend meetings all the time? Not really. But, I pay my dues. I wear this ring because it's really important. It was a really important, that initiation or the initiatic experience was important to me. And so I'm going to wear this ring as a way of remembering that and sharing that with others. But
I think those are both absolutely valid. And I think it's a to each his own type of thing.
Right.
As Matt said. And I agree I like the way that you said it was we're not a secret society. We're a society whose initiation process, I don't even call it secret. I say it's private, which is different.
Sure.
I think secret and private have some different, they seem like they might be synonyms, but they are not in fact. And for instance, if any one of us goes into the bathroom to use the bathroom, what's happening in there is not necessarily a secret. Okay. We all kind of know, but it's private. It's not for everyone to experience.
I was getting anxious about where you were going with that.
If you're intimate with your wife or partner, what have you, that's not secret. but it is private. And
Right.
I think that there's a little bit
That's
of
a
a
good point.
difference there. So but I think I also think that boys will be boys. We like to carve our initials on things. We like to, we do that type of stuff. If we got a piece of chalk and we walk by a sidewalk, we're going to write our initials or something on it. We're going to do that. And it's part of this. And my wife always says it's a Mars Venus thing, and that there are just certain things that we do without realizing why we do it. And I think this as guys, there's this, I want to say I was here. I want to be a part of. So we mark things and we put that image on things, and to associate and find, I guess, the rest of our tribe, or in our case, our fraternity. Right.
Well, and also think of it in this context and I always apply the lens of history for 100, 200 years, let's say, a minimum of 200 years. What was probably the most ornate thing, if you were a Mason, what was probably the most ornate thing that you as a man had in your personal collection of things, jewelry? It would be if you were serving as a past Grandmaster or past Master, and if your lodge either conferred the jewel onto you, gifted you this jewel, it would most likely be this jewel. So for many Masons, many individuals who participated in this fraternity, that Masonic jewel with a little gold encrusted or sapphire or ruby, whatever, was probably one of the most expensive and ornate things they had. They didn't have a lot of stuff, but they took the time out to purchase or to have that as a keepsake, and to donate it and pass it on to other brethren because it mattered that much. They didn't have a beautiful mansion. They may have not had a car or horses, at that time. But, at the end of the day, they were buried perhaps with the Masonic jewel, this ornate, beautiful thing, which may have been the most expensive thing they had.
My jewel, my past master, I have two past masters jewel, one from my Crescent Lodge, which was where I was first past master. And it's nice, but the one that I have that is worth more monetarily, not necessarily I guess intrinsically as well, is the past master's jewel I received from my mother lodge, Mount Ararat. And the reason is it is a past master's jewel that has been handed down from brother to brother for many, many years. And the most recent brother to wear it was a dear friend, Brother Pete Hicks, who was a charter member of Susquehanna Valley, and the past master who put me in line. He passed away last year. Very sad. It was a very close friend. But that is his jewel that I'm wearing. And so now my name is on it with his. And so it is worth quite a bit because it has a real, very large sapphire in the middle of it. It is made of actual gold and all that. And it's a little bit on the heavy side, but it means a lot to me. And I'm pretty certain that it is the most expensive thing I own, because the bank still owns most of my car. And I don't have any horses, as Chris mentioned, but so it is absolutely one of the nicest things that I own. And when I wear it, and I usually only wear it in my lodge, or if I'm going to go someplace where it's important I be known as a past master, then I will put it on. But other than that, I kind of, take very good care to make sure it stays where it belongs. And it's but it is quite an ornate piece and very special to me.
Right. And so, and I think that's when people we don't really necessarily think about that in the day to day, right? It sort of struck me as, what would be the most expensive thing you owned if you were a past master, if you followed, if you followed that path, and got a really ornate jewel. Think of it at the time. And that's the thing. That's the thing that is the lasting memento, your affiliation with a fraternity. Could have been another fraternity, sure. There are obviously different fraternities also have jewels and rings and all these interesting things. But at the end of the day, if that is one of the few things that you cherish, and you make a plan that says, when I die, I want these very ornate and beautiful things to be passed on to my children, or perhaps if you're fortunate to have a brother or a son who is a brother or a Mason, that's something that's very important. So, Maynard, I'm sure for you, passing that on to your son is something that you will cherish, or perhaps, you made plans to pass on other things. And these are jewels, and these are rings and other interesting items.
Absolutely. All right, Brother Matt, wrapping up our discussion on rings, any closing thoughts?
Well, I tend to find this silly in some things that I read sometimes. The first paragraph in this was the finger ring. of this modern time has lost all characteristic meaning in its general form and details. The poetic sentiment, delicate allusion, and playful conceit conveyed by the graceful forms of interwoven flowers and objects have disappeared. And all I could think of at the time was clearly the brother, if he was a brother, was never fortunate enough to visit the Maryland Eastern Shore to buy a mood ring.
They're everywhere.
But I enjoyed the article. One thing it made me think of too, how things have changed, I guess in like social mores. And Chris, you were talking about elaborate jewels and stuff like that. How tattooing, if there's an expensive thing that you could do nowadays, especially, I've done it. Maynard has a couple other brothers that I know have some pretty ornate Masonic related tattoos, and tattoos ain't cheap. That's for sure. And if there's one way to permanently, have that on you, tattoos are the way to do it.
Brother Chris?
I think it's an interesting article. It definitely speaks to this old first sort of decade of the New Age's publication run, where you're not just getting topics on esoteric or perhaps the symbols and degrees. You're getting these other articles on history, other articles that may be tangentially or closely related to something in Freemasonry. I think there's a lot more of these types of articles, not necessarily rings, but on science and music and art and things that we may not be really necessarily focusing on in our day-to-day Masonic activity. And I'm looking forward to finding more of those types of articles and sharing it with you guys.
Absolutely. And I certainly appreciate the discussion with both of you guys. I just want to kind of hand out a reminder to Brother Masons that life is far too short to argue over stupid things, and arguing with each other. If you want to argue as like a goof and be like, I wear it this way or I wear that, that's fine. But there are people who really get mad and they're very upset if you disagree about how the ring should be. Like, they say you're wearing that incorrectly. You should wear it as you received the light, or you should wear it this way, or you should wear it until you're a past master. You should do this. Go to Amazon or Walmart or Billy's Jewelry Shop or the pawn shop up the street. Get a ring if you want one and wear it however the heck you want. There's no rule on it. No Grand Lodge has made a rule. Do what you want, and don't let anybody tell you that there's some rule, because I have looked and there is not. So do not argue with people about stupid things. Just say, okay, brother, and leave it alone and move on with your day.
But just even based as a presentation that you made at our Blue Lodge the other night, that I think that still boils down to the general nature of people, because the presentation you made, you commented to me over text afterwards, a particular brother in there that just kind of scoffed at you.
I know people don't believe me that there's no rule. There's no rule. There's not. I know you want to think the Grand Lodge has said this. No, they haven't. Not one. Fine. If I will be glad to be wrong. If you can provide me with a Grand Lodge edict and or statute on this, I will be glad to say all the Grand Lodges don't care except blank Grand Lodge, insert Grand Lodge here. And
also to your point, what you just said was, this speaks to the fact that people think we're all one homogenous group. We are not. And so if your Grand Lodge does do that, then good for you, or congratulations, or, that's great. Move on. Focus on the things that bring us together.
Yeah, I always say we're not Hydra from the Marvel comics. That's not a thing. If we were, we'd be way better organized, and we're not. So, it's why it's hard to find a good Masonic fish fry these days, but I digress. That's another rabbit hole. So that's Brother Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH. He is the historian for the Valley of Washington, D.C. Also, Brother Matt Bowers, the dulcet voice of the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, and 32nd degree master of the Royal Secret. Now, I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH. Thank you guys for listening. If you got questions, comments, you want to sign off on this one, podcast at scottishrite.org is the way to get that done. Or if you're listening on YouTube, the comment field is still active, so go ahead and drop a comment below. We appreciate it if you like and share the podcast with your friends and brothers. And as always, we'll catch you next time.